have connected in. We may have some more joining us, and I'm sure we will. But welcome to everybody. Before we get started, I just want to run through a few of the sort of the admin things and how to use this tool if you're not used to connecting in via Zoom. So the really first important thing is, can you please make sure that you've got a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or in my case, a container of water, because we're going to have a great chat over the next hour, and we just want to make sure that you're all hydrated and well and truly comfortable. Also, we're going to use a few of the different functions on Zoom through today. So just want to identify a couple of those. On your bottom strip of your screen, you should see a little speaker symbol. That's for muting and unmuting. So for most of the presentation, you'll just have myself and Brendan who will be talking. So I would ask that everybody else is muted, and Anna and Maxima, who are providing great support in the background, will also be helping with that, just so we don't get any background noise. The challenge too is we're all on completely different bandwidths. We're sitting in a whole lot of different places around Australia, and we know that technology can sometimes be a little wobbly. So please accept that you may be seeing the screen looking slightly different from others, or what you may have seen in other presentations. And we'll also, during the presentations, because we've got some big files that we'd like to share, we're going to make sure that everybody else's videos are off. And then when we get to the end of the presentation and we're doing questions and answers and having a conversation, then we'll have it so that you can share your video, and we would love to see all of your faces. A couple of other functions that we're going to use. If you click on an area which says participants, if you click on that, you'll be able to see participants, and you'll be able to do what's called raise your hand. So I'm going to ask a question now, just so you can help us understand whether you're actually able to connect in and we can see you, because later on when we do Q&A, we'd like you to raise your hand when we ask a question. My question is, now that some of the restrictions are being removed in Australia so that you can get out a bit more, have you thought about that favourite place that you're going to get out to, that favourite place, whether it be in the bush or the beach or on a mountain or in the desert? Have you decided where you're going to go to first? And if you have, can you please raise your hand by clicking the little raise your hand symbol? Fantastic. We've got some people that have definitely worked out where they're going to go. So I hope you don't mind, but I am just going to ask a couple of people completely at random if they'd like to share with us where they plan to go. So sorry for doing that to you all with no notice. And that way then, if you unmute your mic, then we can hear from you, and you can just share with us quickly where you plan to go. So can I just ask, let's just ask Peter Sainsbury, if you don't mind. Peter, do you want to unmute and just share with us where you plan to go when you can get out and about?
Hi, Heather. Well, first of all, I'm going to go for a coffee just around the corner. And then in terms of outside, I'll probably go for a swim at Bondi.
Well, that sounds absolutely fantastic. It's a little cool for us here in Victoria, so we're probably not going to be doing that unless there's some of those that are the iceberger swimmers, etc., who are thoroughly enjoying that. And I'm just going to ask one other person, Pippa, do you just want to unmute yourself and just share where you plan to go? Maybe Pippa's having problems just checking in with getting the thing to work, or and sometimes that happens. So Pippa, do you want to share? Okay, Pippa's unmuted, but we seem to have lost the sound there. So that's just one of the challenges. If that happens to you and you really want to share something, then there is another way that we can connect in. Again, in that strip bar down the bottom where there's a series of symbols, there also should be one which says chat. So if you click on that, you can type in questions and thoughts as we go. So we will keep an eye on that so that we make sure that when we're having a chat, that we actually talk through those level of questions and answer those and have that discussion. So there are a couple of ways that you can actually ask questions or bring up issues. So we'll just ask one more person, and I might just ask Sabina, if looks like you're on the line with your hand in the air, where do you plan on going? If you want to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Wilson's Prom.
Sounds fantastic, and I can see Brendan smiling, and I've got a smile too. It's an area that I think a lot of us in Victoria would like to get to. So thank you everybody for raising your hand and sharing that. We have the ability centrally to put everybody's hands back down, so we will do that so we can move on. Before we also get started, I'd like to do a welcome to everybody. So I'm going to read a bit of a list, but we have got a great number of attendees today. So welcome to John, Alison, Sarah, Kent, Rebecca, Simon, Miles, Linda, Becky, 2 Davids, Sophie, Kirsty, Chris, Gina, 2 Allens, Angus, Tim, Sally, James, Claire, and Edward, Amber, Sally, 3 Peters. So Peter's the most popular. Lynn, Helen, Gordon, Monique, Stuart, Anita, Robin, Michael, Donna, David, Cheryl, 2 Ians, Dorothy, Kay, and I know there's a number of staff on this call as well, so welcome to staff, and also some fantastic master's students from Macquarie University who are studying conservation biology. So they're joining us today. I think you're students of Michelle Leishman, who's one of our board directors at Bush Heritage. So welcome to everybody. I apologise if I've missed out any names. But please join us for what will be a great hour. Also, if you're looking, when we're starting to have the conversation, it'd be great if we know who you are. So please make sure that your name is included. And if you just click on the box, which is you, and hover over your name, you can actually change your name. Or you can remain anonymous. So you can change it to anonymous as well. So on that note, let's make a start and I'll share conversation. I will hand over to Brendan partway through, but I'd like to introduce Brendan now, who's my co-presenter and co-conversationalist. So Brendan is a Professor of Conservation Ecology at the University of Melbourne and is the Director of the Threatened Species Recovery Research Hub. And has done a lot of work looking at conservation decisions and the uncertainty around that, a lot of work that has helped direct policy and also actions of organisations such as ourselves and many others. We at Bush Heritage thoroughly enjoy working with Brendan and the broader team, and so we have lots of interactions. And this is an opportunity to share some of those insights and hear from a leader in the field. And I know you'll be captivated by what Brendan has to share. So welcome, Brendan, and thanks for letting us twist your arm to share with supporters, friends and students your insights.
It's great to be here, thank you.
Thanks, Brendan. As you may have gathered, we are sitting in different parts of Victoria. We hope that connectivity holds up. If we have challenges, we have the fantastic team of Anna and Maxima in the background who will help us out. The joys of technology, sometimes things freeze a little. If that happens, please just persevere with us and we will get the slides back up and we'll continue the conversation. So I'd like to formally start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we're meeting. And for me, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'm actually sitting in our Melbourne office, or even if I was sitting at home, it's the Wurundjeri people. And I reflect on how they've been here for 60,000 years and the knowledge and understanding that they have about how to manage the land and how important that is if we are to actually deal with the challenges of this global extinction crisis, that we need all levels of knowledge, and particularly that knowledge that has been there for so long to help us chart a pathway forward. I'm now going to ask you to do something which may seem a little bit weird on a video conference, but I'm actually going to ask you to close your eyes. And so if you can close your eyes and just think about that really special place, that place, whether it be Bondi Beach or Wilson's Prom, and that you go out into that space, with your eyes closed, and you can imagine the sounds, the smells, the breeze, your Bondi, that feeling of the salt spray on your skin, and how precious that is to each of us in that area that we thoroughly enjoy. And think about what would happen if it wasn't there. What would we be missing out on as individuals, as families, as a broader humankind? Now, open back up your eyes and we'll continue on. But I want you to keep with you that thought and that feeling, because that's really at the core of what we will lose if we continue down the path of the mass extinctions that are occurring. And this is what drives bush heritage. So for us, our vision is healthy country, protected forever, and that's what underpins everything we do. It's what helps get all of us out of bed, whether we're working on the reserve, whether providing science planning, support with telling the stories, or supporting the organisation with management. We want to make sure that the bush is healthy, that our kids, our grandkids, can see the amazing species in Australia, can connect in with it, and know that these places exist. And post-COVID, that we can get back out into them. So for us at Bush Heritage, this means working across the 37 reserves. So hopefully now, with if technology's behaved, you will see the map of Australia with lots of dots. So the red dots are those reserves in which we operate and manage. And I know many of you on the call know those reserves really well and have some that you're really passionate about and that you love going to visit. So they're across all of Australia, from the beautiful areas of the Hamlin Pools on the World Heritage Site Bay Area, through to the floristically diverse southwestern corner of Western Australia, to the desert country of Cravens Peak. And if anybody can see behind my shoulder there, the picture on the wall is of that orange desert of Cravens Peak. Through to the home of the night parrot, an elusive bird in Pullen, to a little fish that we'll talk about at Edgbaston, and then down through the swamp country of Yantabulla, the desert, arid areas of, well, not desert, but arid areas of Bon Bon and Bulkamata in South Australia, and then more coastal areas of the southeast of New South Wales and Victoria, and into Tasmania. The red dots are those reserves that we own and manage. The green dots are where we partner with a whole network of organisations and a lot of farming organisations. And the blue dots are the Aboriginal partnerships. So those are partnerships on Aboriginal held, managed land. What is really important to us at Bush Heritage is those 25 partnerships that we have with Aboriginal people, 14 on Bush Heritage held land, and 11 of those on Aboriginal managed land. And this photo here is a picture of me and Jacko. Jacko is a female ranger from Gurrajari, which is about 3 hours south of Broome. And I had the privilege of spending 2 days with the rangers and having Jacko and the elders help me understand the different plants and how important they are from a medicinal perspective and from a cultural perspective, and how the importance of the diversity is needed for all species, plants and animals, and how they thrive and are interconnected. And it was a great opportunity for it to be reinforced to me that we only know such a little small amount, and that we need to work together with traditional owners that have that 60,000 years of knowledge to help them come up with plans to protect this fantastic country. We work really hard across large landscapes and focus on all species. We try and make it so that the common doesn't become the uncommon, so that we're trying to make sure that species don't end up on Brendan's watch list of threatened species. So we try and work on all, but we also end up being focused on a number of threatened species or critically endangered. So just like to share a few of these that are across our reserves. The top left is 2 malleefowl with their nest in an area that we revegetated in Western Australia about 5-6 years ago. So it's great to see a bird that was expected to go extinct in WA appearing back in a revegetated area. On the top right is the little red-finned blue-eye fish, tiny little fish, that is just found in a few little spring areas in Queensland. And that's very much on the critically endangered list. And we have one of our team, an ecologist, Pippa, who spends her whole focus on those spring areas and how to protect them, with an army of volunteers and researchers focused on that. Heading down below to the picture on the bottom right is the area of Tasmania called the Tasmanian Midlands. And there we have some very much endangered grassland areas, and we're working with our partners, farmers and the Tasmanian Land Conservancy to protect those areas that are remaining. Also on the left there, you'll see a little picture of some very purple wood. So that is the purple wood. It's not surprising, purple wood tree. It's a type of wattle and acacia, and it's found in the arid areas of South Australia. So again, a very much endangered plant that we have custodian for. And this little bird, which is in the middle, so it's a little fawny coloured bird about the size of a quail. So you imagine this little, little tiny bird that scurries around but blends in really, really well with its environment. And it likes sort of stony areas with very little vegetation. And we've been working really hard to make sure that we still had them on Bulkamata, which is west of Broken Hill. And we had this situation where the team of researchers were putting out sound meters everywhere to pick up the sounds to see that we still had them through the drought. We weren't picking up much on the sound cards, and then our ecologist, Graham, almost ran over 3 of them. He didn't run over them, but it was great to actually see that he could find them, that they were there, and they were still coping with the drought conditions that we had. Good news is we've now had a little bit of rain, so hopefully we start to see Bulkamata bounce back. So we have quite a focus, and we look after quite a few threatened species. And it's hard enough when you've got climate change and drought. And then we had the summer that we had. And this is just a few pictures that I wanted to share with you of what happened over this past summer. Burren Reserve on the top left is about an hour east of Canberra, and that was completely burnt out. It was an area of fantastic trees, of lovely little valleys of ferns beforehand, and that was completely burnt. But we have seen greater gliders back in there. We have heard powerful owls. We are seeing the ferns come back. We're seeing lots of epicormic growth on the trees, and that bit of rain that we had earlier in the year just really has meant that is sprouting back really well. The bottom left-hand corner, I know, is a reserve that will be familiar to many of you. That's Scottsdale. That's about an hour south of Canberra. And that was a reserve where lots of you had spent time planting out the 30,000 seedlings and focusing on protecting the native grasslands. Unfortunately, 60% of that reserve was burnt. But again, what is great to see is that the fire also burnt the lovegrass, the weed that was causing issues there. And since then, with the rain, we've had a flush of growth of native grasses and the small herb plants, and the team have been out collecting a lot of those seeds. So it's been great to see that flush of growth and the fact that we've now got a really good seed bank to do some more propagation. The top right hand is Yantabulla Swamp. That is owned by South Endeavour Trust, and we manage it in conjunction with our Nari property, which neighbours it. It's west of Bourke, And I was there last year about this time, maybe a month later, and walking through very large, thick, lush vegetation from a dry flood that had come down. And unfortunately, we had a lightning strike, and you can imagine with that level of growth that had dried off, we had a fire there which took about 3 weeks to actually bring under control. Our team from all over Australia, along with the locals from the RFS and others, did a fantastic job just rotating through, providing the support to get that fire under control. And I'll show you a bit of a picture of what Nari is looking like now. The last one there is Yorka. Again, it's a reserve that I know is known to many of you. It's in the dry tropics, west of Cairns. And we always do mosaic burning there as a way of managing both the weeds, but also to help prevent catastrophic fires. In this case, a lightning strike hit, and unfortunately the team ended up having to manage that fire on Christmas Day. And so we had a number of team members along with contractors and the neighbours fighting that fire. That impacted about 40% of the reserve and was hot in parts. But we are seeing the seeds of hope. And this is just a quote from one of our senior ecologists. And Matt is actually quite upbeat about what we're seeing, because we're starting to see animals return, and we're certainly seeing the growth that's occurring. So we've been busy putting out camera traps so we can see what's happening, focusing on weeds because they can often have a bit of a sprout after a fire, and also feral animals. Many of you will know that cats love to hunt in areas that have been burnt, so making sure that we're on top of, you know, cats, pigs, goats, deer, whatever it is within the landscape. And what we're seeing is those sparks of hope. So the Mareeba Wok wallabies at Yorka, they inhabit an area called Tiger Hill, a beautiful, craggy, rocky area. And that was quite hot, the fire there, and we thought we had lost them. But we put the camera traps out, and very quickly we were picking up the rock wallabies. So we're not quite sure where they took refuge, but they managed to survive through the fires and are doing really well now, particularly as we've had significant rain and got lots of growth. For those of you who know Yantabulla and Nari, we've had another dry flood come down from Queensland, and we've also had rain. So we've actually had the best level of water there in the swamp since we bought Nari. And on a great note, and I know it's really hard under COVID-19, we're actually seeing a significant number of birds there now. We're not wanting to say that we've got a major bird breeding event happening, you know, don't want to jinx ourselves, but we are seeing a significant number of birds, whether they be, you know, your major water birds and your pelicans, you know, your ducks, etc. But lots and lots of birds, which is absolutely fantastic. It has been a challenge for reserve staff because the reserve manager there, as he said at the start of COVID-19, self-isolation is not a problem when you've been flooded in for 3 weeks. But it's great that he's actually able to see the whole area come back to life post the fires. But we couldn't do any of this work without all of you on the call, without our staff. In the top right-hand corner is Greg out at Nari, and Graham, an ecologist, setting up sound meters. Without all of our volunteers, including those on the left here who are practicing their social distancing as they walk back from work at Scottsdale. Without all of you who are supporters, without all the research projects like the one in the bottom left there with researchers putting up, you know, the fencing to stop the migratory move of the mosquito fish who kill off the redfin blue-eye. Without all of that, we just couldn't do it. And with those 70 research projects, there are fantastic partnerships with lots of organisations and lots of universities and institutions. One of those is with the Threatened Species Hub, and it is great that we're able to work with people of the calibre of Brendan and all of the colleagues around, not just Australia, but around the globe, to glean insights that will help us to manage these areas and protect them. So that's just a little bit about what's been happening from a bush heritage perspective, and that link into the research work and the fact that we're part of that global community that is trying to protect this earth so that we can still go outside and hear those sounds, to feel the wind and the rustle of the trees, and to know that we can see animals and have insects and see that we actually have an interconnected, really alive and vibrant world that helps support us, not just with all of the things that it gives us from an ecosystem services, but all of the joy that it also brings to each of us and future generations. So that is now my segue across to Brendan. So I'm going to stop sharing and hopefully we'll get the system to work, and Brendan will start sharing his slides.
Thanks, Heather. I'm just looking for my share. Oh, it's down the bottom now. There we go. Little challenges.
Yeah, I think as everybody on this call knows, is once you start sharing things or moving things around, the controls within Zoom seem to change from one spot to another. Just
Yeah,
to keep us on our toes. So over to you, Brendan.
Exactly. Thank you. Well, I guess it's rare to have the privilege of being able to present with a shirt on but my slippers at the same time. It could be my first presentation of that kind, so you've got to expect to trade that against some technical challenges. It's a real honour, Heather, to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to give this talk. I love our collaborations with Bush Heritage. It's one of the great honours, or privileges I should say, of being the Threatened Species Hub Director, is that I get to work with groups like Bush Heritage who are actually out there being the brokers of hope, if you like, the groups who are actually doing the work on the ground to try and solve a lot of these terrible challenges that I'm going to talk about now. Can I just get a thumbs up from you, Heather, that I'm coming through and that you've got my full screen in view? Okay, lovely, thank you. So I'm sitting here, very lucky to have been able to move to the country for this last couple of weeks. I'm up at a place called Mitta in northeast Victoria. It's lovely country. I was thinking about where I would really want to get to when I got out of COVID-19 isolation. I'm not sure I'll go that far from here. Perhaps I'll just spend a little bit more time up on the ridge, checking out my local population of greater gliders. But it's really beautiful country, and I want to acknowledge that it's Doodaroa traditional country, and pay my respects to Doodaroa elders past, present and emerging. It's a really, really wonderful part of the world. Today, I'm going to start by a bit of an introduction to the global context, I guess, of the extinction crisis. I'll then provide a bit more detail about where we sit in Australia and that Australian context for the extinction crisis. And then hopefully, if I haven't lost you to the vodka cabinet or whatever you need in that sort of situation, I'd like to then try and lift us up and think a bit about some of the things that we should be doing, can be doing, and in many cases that people are doing to try and stem the tide of extinctions that we've been seeing. So taking a look at the big picture to start with, back in 2010, Minister Burke, who was then Minister for the Environment, made a promise. It's a promise on behalf of Australia to the world and to future generations. And this was embodied in the Aichi targets under the Convention on Biological Diversity. And the promise was this: by 2020, the extinction of known threatened species had been prevented. Their conservation status, particularly of those most in decline, had been improved or sustained. So this was a promise that we made to the world. That promise was actually transcribed almost verbatim into the Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so you can read there 15.5, we're going to take urgent and significant action to reduce the degradation of habitats, halt the loss of biodiversity, protect and prevent the extinction of threatened species. Big promise. So how are we doing? Like a lot of these big promises, often they're made without thinking about exactly how we're going to measure our performance against our promise, and that was unfortunately pretty much the case with the CBD promises. A few years later, though, we saw the emergence of the Intergovernmental Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. That's that IPBES, IPBES acronym that you can see there on your screen. It's kind of like an IPCC for biodiversity and ecosystem services. And one of the key functions of the IPBES was to create a platform to evaluate or assess biodiversity globally. So from around 2016, we started seeing the development of regional assessments of the state and trends in biodiversity. I was involved in a methodological assessment to help support how the regional assessments occurred. And then just in the last year, we've had the publication of the IPBES Global Assessment, and that's been a great platform for us to have to be able to provide that information to the world about what's happening to biodiversity and threatened species and ecosystem services at that scale. A huge collaboration of literally hundreds of scientists from across the planet, social scientists and ecologists, economists, you name it, very many of them from Australia. So what did we find in the IPBES Global Assessment? Not surprisingly, a key finding is that nature still and always has underpins all aspects of human life. Over 2 billion people still rely on wood as their primary energy. 4 billion rely on natural medicines predominantly. 70% of all drugs are natural or copies of natural drugs. 75% of all crops are animal pollinated. And we estimate that the loss of insect pollinators, or just bees, could cost the global economy $560 billion a year. So this is a key economic and existential threat, the loss of pollinators. Natural systems are the only viable carbon sink. So if we're going to flatten the curve on carbon emissions and actually flatten and actually see carbon sequestration at a broad scale, that's going to have to be done through natural systems, through restoration, through forests, through grasslands, peatlands, allowing those natural systems to re-emerge and start sequestering carbon. This is a huge challenge, of course, from a conservation perspective, also a huge opportunity, because we can convey that message so that people understand that our future depends on restoring these ecosystems to keep our climate under control. Unfortunately, though, the current trend is that for ecosystems, the capacity to provide us with these services is declining everywhere. So this is a key graphic from the IPBES Global Assessment. You can see the rows are services that ecosystems provide to us and to nature. And so the top one there, I'll read you across: habitat creation and maintenance. The next slot is the 50-year global trend. At the very far edge, you can see where that's serious decrease or decline in the capacity for nature to deliver habitat creation and maintenance. That global trend continues. That's the vertical arrow there inside the blue dots. The blue dot indicates that this is a well-established, scientifically well-established trend. And this donut here indicates that it's global. This trend is consistent across the whole planet. And there's a series of indicators on the right that are used to describe those trends. And so you can see that the case for habitat creation and maintenance, ecosystems' capacity to provide pollination and dispersal of seeds is decreasing, and it's a global phenomenon. And down the bottom are some other services that I think are particularly pertinent for us to think about at the moment. Number 9, the regulation of hazards and extreme events. That we've been witnessing in Australia over the last year. The drought followed by the fires is a sign to us that the ecosystem and the system itself is starting to fail in its capacity to regulate the hazards of these extreme events. And you can see here, particularly recently, the regulation of detrimental organisms and biological processes. This is disease, vector-borne disease, and the capacity of ecosystems to buffer us from those outbreaks of disease is also decreasing and continuing to decline, and that's a global phenomenon. Drilling down a bit into the biodiversity question, this graph here on the x-axis is the years, and on the y-axis, it's the cumulative percentage of species in these broad taxonomic groups of amphibians, mammals, birds, and reptiles that have been lost over this period since the 1500s. And so if you look at mammals there, you can see there's been this fairly consistent, almost linear loss of mammals over that period, ranging from due to overexploitation, persecution, and habitat loss. Whereas you look at amphibians, it's been a precipitous loss of amphibians since around the 1900s. Definitely, yes, habitat loss, but obviously disease, chytrid fungus and other things has really pushed many amphibian species over the edge. And so you can see now that we've lost nearly 2.5% of the amphibian species that existed in 1500. And that's a lot, because if you look at this grey wedge down here, that is the percentage of these taxonomic groups we would expect to lose given background extinction rates. Species go extinct and in the geological record, we can see approximately what those background extinction rates are. And you can see that where we're at now is 10 to 100 times those background rates for these taxonomic groups. So that's why we say we're in the Anthropocene and we're experiencing a mass extinction event that is 10 to 100 times the background rate of extinctions. A key headline finding in the IPBES report was that we not only have we lost all of these species, but we have 1 million species at risk of extinction, which just seems incredible. Apart from anything else, we've only described about 20% of species. We've only actually described taxonomically about 1.7 million of our species, and there's still so many more out there that we haven't even described yet. So how can we even put this estimate on the number of species that we think are at risk of extinction? How did they do it? It's a very simple estimation. They basically estimate the number of species that we think are out there, multiply that by the proportion of species that tend to be ranked at high risk of extinction when assessed by the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, determines the extinction risk for species, and you will have heard of the red list probably. And so if you multiply that percentage of species that tends to be identified as at risk of extinction by the number of species we think there are, then this is their estimate that they get the number that they think are threatened. So there's a scientific study that estimates that we have around 8.1 million animal and plant species on the planet. That's a rubbery number, of course. When we assess plants and vertebrates, basically non-insects, we find that about 25% of them tend to be at risk of extinction. If you multiply that by the estimated number of these species, you get this 0.65 million estimate of plants and vertebrates that we consider likely to be at risk of extinction. A similar calculation for insects, except that generally insects don't tend to be as at risk, so only about 10% of them come up as threatened with extinction when we do IUCN assessments. So if you add these two numbers together, you get a rubbery number around 1 million species. That's how they arrived at that number. Is it a good number? I think it's as good a way as we've currently got to estimate the number of species facing extinction. It's a useful communication device, and if I had to come up with a number, I'd be going for a number like that. What's driving these extinctions? What's driving these losses? WWF do a nice job in this Living Planet report, I think, of highlighting the connection between these socioeconomic trends and then the Earth systems trends that are really pushing species to the edge. So keep in mind here, just this image up in the right-hand corner is just to remind us that 75% of the terrestrial area of the planet has been significantly altered or degraded since the 1500s, and that we've actually lost 85% of wetlands, not just altered or degraded, but lost 85% of wetlands that existed in the 1500s. They've been concreted over, basically. So this is the backdrop, I guess, to this extinction crisis that's key to remember. One of the things that strikes you when you look at the Living Planet report in these graphs is just the similarity in the shape, the almost exponential growth in world population, mirrored here in the almost exponential primary energy use, that then translates across to this almost exponential increase in carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere, ocean acidification, tropical forest loss, and terrestrial biosphere degradation. I'm hoping you can follow my mouse because I appreciate there's a lot of plots on this, but that just really, I think, eloquently and graphically pins it all back to that fundamental driver of the number of us and the way we consume resources as a key driver for these biodiversity losses. The other big driver, I won't call it the elephant in the room, we know it's there. This is a really good demonstration. Many of you will have seen this before, but it's a good one to show to any relatives who may still be a little bit undecided about the existence of climate change. This is a graphic produced by Antti Lipponen in Helsinki. You can see here the big circles. If it's a big blue circle, that means that that year, in this particular country, was a below long-term trend temperature for that year, the average temperature. Whereas if you get a largish red circle, that indicates that was an above average year for that country in terms of temperature. And you can see the numbers there. And I think it's really interesting to just see the way you have this almost random pattern of warmer and cooler years through the early 1900s. And through the after the Industrial Revolution, you just start to see that move to warmer and warmer years. Still, obviously, a fair bit of natural variation, but then ultimately you get through the 80s, 90s, and into the noughties, and you just start seeing hotter, hotter, and hotter until you finally get to these years in the late, in 2017, 2018, 2019, above average years every year, everywhere. Absolutely a terrifying trend. So the overall finding, goals for conserving and sustainably using nature cannot be met under current trajectories. This is the IPBES grand conclusion. Only transformative change will allow goals to be met by 2030. And I think it's going to have to be pretty dramatic transformative change. This is not lost on the people who really drive the planet, which is economists. The World Economic Forum, not exactly a kind of a feral greeny left-wing organisation, now in its global risk register for the world for the world economy. You can see here the y-axis is a ranking of impact. The x-axis is how likely that impact is to occur. And now the top right area, the biggest risks to the global economy are all nature things, extreme weather events, failure of us to mitigate and adapt to climate change, natural disasters, water crisis, biodiversity loss, and ecosystem collapse. These are the big things, the big ticket items that are big threats to the world economy. And cyber attacks is really what the only very kind of, I guess, anthropocentric threat that registers in that nasty top right-hand box. Interesting. Energy price shocks, the thing that we all sweat about and worry about and is in the newspapers every day, increases in energy prices, etc. Chicken feed in terms of risk to the world economy, according to the World Economic Forum. Spread of infectious diseases was given a ranking in 2019 of pretty high impact, but pretty unlikely to happen. So it's funny, even economists can get it wrong sometimes. In Australia, what's the context here? 110 extinctions since European invasion. We now have on our IPBES Act, our threatened species list, 1,800 species now listed as at high risk of extinction. Only a third of those are not even monitored. So we could have lost them last week and we wouldn't know. 40% of them have no recovery plans. And here's that's the last ever recorded call of the Christmas Island pipistrelle. That was recorded and provided by Zoos Victoria. That species is now gone. Nobody will ever hear that call again. I find that quite moving. But of course, even since we lost the pipistrelle, we've lost three other species three other animal species. So the slope on our extinction curve, unfortunately, is not flattening. Here's some more evidence. Our particular skill in this country is mammal extinctions. And John Winarski, over the years, has done an amazing job of documenting the plight and decline of Australian mammals. This graph here just shows over years the cumulative number of animal extinctions that we've observed, and it's a very linear plot, and it continues to go up, and we are going to see another 3 or 4 species go onto this extinct list in the next 12 months, and goodness knows what else after the fires. So we've accounted for 35% of all global mammal extinctions since 1500. If you put our proportional loss of mammals onto that global loss of species graph that I showed you before, this is where Australia is in terms of our proportional loss of mammals. So you can see that we really are, unfortunately, to use a cricket analogy, if anybody here knows anything about cricket, the sort of Steve Smith of mammal extinctions. It's a really tragic track record. But it's not just mammals, of course. And the other thing is, it's not just the species we've lost. Obviously, one of the key precursors to extinction is population size decline. And so this Australian Threatened Species Index that's been developed by our Threatened Species Hub in partnership with lots of partners, 70 odd, but particularly driven by BirdLife Australia, and compiled by Eliza Bayraktarov down here in the bottom right corner. It shows that on average, if you look at the y-axis on this graph, and you fix 1985 to be the base, on average, populations of bird species have declined by about 50% since 1985. It's not that long ago. I have very strong memories of embarrassing myself at blue light discos in 1985, and since then, the average size of bird populations in this country has gone down by 50%. This is an incredible statistic, and it really does give you a sense of the number of bird extinctions that we're probably going to see over the next 10 or 20 years, unless we can flatten that curve somehow. Our loss is not a secret, of course. This paper by Anthony Waldron and colleagues in Nature in 2017 highlights the global biodiversity loss hotspots across the planet. And in short, Australia ranks as the second highest villain in the global biodiversity loss game, the highest in the developed world, the highest global biodiversity loss in recent times has been in Indonesia, but certainly Australia has the highest biodiversity loss record in the developed world. And incidentally, in that paper, they also identified Australia as one of the most egregious underspenders when it comes to preventing biodiversity loss. What's driving our losses? Well, it's pretty much the same as the global pattern: massive land use change, clearing of natural habitats for crops, for cities and towns, in the introduction of invasive species that cause incredible damage to natural populations, and the recent advent of disease, and in some cases, good old traditional persecution and the terrible tragedy of the Tassie tiger there. So I'm going to try something here. It's a very dangerous thing for me to do in a Zoom presentation, but I'm going to ask you if there's anybody here who might be able to give me an idea of which threat threatens the largest number of species in Australia. So which of these threats is the biggest killer in terms of threatened species in Australia? And I'm going to just ask you to put your hand up if you think you can answer me that question. And I'm gonna scroll out this box here. I'm looking for a hand. Who's going to be brave enough to tell me the biggest threat to species in this country? If I don't see any hands go up soon, I'm going to have to keep the prize.
You've actually got quite a few hands going up there, Brendan.
Oh, great. Okay, I can't see any of them. So Heather, choose someone and let's hear it.
Okay, well, we've got some fantastic people here. I'm just going to scroll through to maybe make sure that, so we've got 4 people that are brave enough to have a go at this. So I'm just picking purely at random. So I'm going to go with Rebecca Chu. Rebecca, if you want to unmute yourself and share who you think that is.
I think it's cats, invasive species.
Rebecca, thank you for that suggestion. It is probably partly the fault of the Threatened Species Recovery Hub and our preoccupation with cats that you've made that call. Cats are a huge driver of extinction in this country. We know that every year cats devour 360 million birds. That's 1 million birds a day, and 60 million birds a year are taken by domestic cats. So cats are a huge problem, but believe it or not, in terms of the number of species on our threatened species list, there's another culprit that threatens even more species than cats do. Is there any other guesses there?
Oh, if I can dob somebody else in this time. So how about we go with David Rickards. David, if you want to unmute yourself and share your thoughts. So David, have you found the unmute button? It should be probably down the bottom left-hand corner. Okay, looks like David hasn't been able to, so I'm just going to try with somebody else. If another David Fillmore, if you'd like to share your thoughts.
I'd go with the humans in the top left-hand corner.
Yep. I actually get that answer quite a lot. That's a very good answer. Unfortunately, we don't have the humility to list ourselves per se as the threat in our threatened species recovery plans. But I think we probably all agree that's pretty likely the answer. I'm just going to give it away now. I'm going to donate the prize to Rebecca for being the bravest to come up first. It's a Midder Valley Brewery hat. I'm sure you'll be really rapt to receive it, Rebecca, eventually. It's actually rabbits, and I'm going to see if I can go back to my slide presentation. And the reason is that these devastating, deadly critters are actually the most threatening force in Australia's biodiversity. Is that the bulk of our threatened species are plants, and rabbits are still the #1 killer of a regenerating endangered plant. And so right now, and probably for the foreseeable future, they'll continue to be, alongside the other non-native herbivores, one of our biggest threats to threatened species in this country. Of course, we've experienced something over the summer that is almost a step change in the impact of climate extremes on biodiversity. So the fires through 2019, 2020, the actual escaped wildfires, this is not counting savanna burns, added up to about the area of England between 10 and 15 million hectares, depending on how you account it. An incredible extent for uncontrolled wildfire. You can see here that one of the key defining features of our wildfire season was the comprehensiveness with which the wildfires burnt across the landscape. So here on Kangaroo Island, I was there a couple of weeks ago when that photo was taken, looking for kilometres. We're talking 15, 20 kilometres down to the lighthouse. Absolutely comprehensive devastation. And as a result, this little Kangaroo Island Dunnart here lost more than 80% of its habitat. I suspect it's somewhere higher than 90%. They have found Dunnart since the fires in these couple of tiny little patches that remained actually quite close to farmland. But it's the comprehensive devastation. If you look at B and C here, these are, friends took those from a helicopter over East Gippsland. You don't see this in the fires in the past so much. It was always, there were little valley bottoms where the fires skipped from ridge to ridge, and you got those green patches remaining in the valley bottoms. So much of this fire was so intense and so comprehensive. That's why we're seeing these extensive losses. And so from our threatened species list, the Commonwealth Government actually has estimated that 320 species lost more than 10% of their suitable habitat. Of those, around 114 lost more than half of their suitable habitat, and around 50 lost greater than 80%. These sort of numbers would immediately put you in the critically endangered list under IUCN. So this really was a catastrophic, not to be underestimated event in biodiversity in Australia. I'm so sorry for that very, very extended, depressing tirade. I'm now going to talk about some of the things that we think we could or should be doing, and hopefully that'll give us some lift and a little bit of purpose. So the first thing I would say is that we should be prosecuting the case for adequate resourcing for threatened species and biodiversity in general, including all of these activities here. They cost money. Whether it's captive breeding of endangered mammals, control of feral predators, restoration, empowering Indigenous land management, seed banking, you name it, all of these things cost money. And right now, the really good news is spending money on biodiversity works. So this graph here shows that as you increase spending on biodiversity relative to the size of your biodiversity problem, you actually decrease biodiversity loss. This is really good news. Someone should be taking this to finance and cabinet. I've tried to, they won't talk to me. The other good news, in the United States, where if a species is listed under the Endangered Species Act, it is mandated that funding be provided for the recovery of that species. And what does that mean? Over long periods of time when species are listed under the Act, they actually show recovery. So the average recovery for birds that are listed under the Endangered Species Act is a 6-fold population recovery. That's the average recovery, compared with the average trajectory for birds that are not listed under the Endangered Species Act of -20%. So the Endangered Species Act works, and I say one of the main reasons it works in the United States is because it mandates funding for species, but also because it mandates the protection of critical habitats. I'll come back to that in a minute. So what are we spending and why is it not enough? Here's the United States budget here in millions. So you can see that on average across years, they're spending about $2 billion a year targeted towards threatened species conservation. Down here is Australia's budgets. $500 million a year, our total Commonwealth environment budget. So you can see already a massive difference. The threatened species proportion of that is much lower. The United States has fewer species on its threatened species list. It's a country about the same area, and yet they're spending, in the case of threatened species spending, more than 10 times what we spend on our threatened species conservation. We don't know, obviously there's some little fluctuations in what we spend in Australia, but for the most part, you can see that on average about 500 million a year on the environment, but significantly less targeted towards threatened species. That's the yellow dot there that we've calculated recently. We don't know what's going to happen in the United States, anyone's guess really, but the point here is up until now, their spending has been preventing extinctions, ours hasn't. Recently, we worked out what it would take. I won't bore you with these details of this table, other than to say that when you think about what you need to spend for each of these broad taxonomic groups, we calculate that about $1.6 billion a year is required to recover our listed threatened species, which sounds like a lot of money. Put it in this context. Every year as a nation, we spend $580 million a year on pet grooming. We spend $1.1 billion a year as a nation on pet accessories. And we spend $2.5 billion a year on our cats. So we can afford this. There's other things we spend money on. We give tax breaks to coal mining companies at about the rate of what we need to spend to conserve all of our threatened species. And I won't even go into the aircraft carrier there. But clearly, as a nation, we can afford to spend the money. What else should we be doing? There's some amazing momentum now developing in regenerative agriculture and biodiversity, biodiverse carbon farming. We do agriculture on 60% of this nation. If we're not conserving threatened species in agricultural land, we're probably losing the battle. So there's some great initiatives going around at the moment. This is just one, some colleagues at ANU and their Sustainable Farms initiative. We want to see a lot more of this in order to actually get conservation and biodiversity outcomes on private agricultural land. We need to put more effort into supporting traditional owner land management. This has really sharpened the focus over the last fire season, but it's not just about fire, of course. We have so much to learn from traditional owners through two-way learning, but we also have a lot to give. And the giving can be supporting traditional owners to manage land in the ways that they know best. This is one of my favourite projects, a postdoc, a NESP project, Anya Scroblin here, working with KJ and the Martu people in Martu country, an area bigger than the size of Tasmania, combining our statistical and mathematical modelling of bilby distributions with traditional knowledge of bilby to identify the best places in the landscape to manage and monitor bilbies. And that's the kind of collaboration and support that I think we can start to give. Bush Heritage is an amazing national leader in partnerships with Indigenous groups, and this is just a shout out to recognise the amazing efforts of Bush Heritage in this space. And I'm not going to say anything more about it because I'll leave it to Heather to talk about the incredible work there. I'm certainly not an expert on your business, but this is an amazing leadership role that Bush Heritage has in Australia, I think. What else can we do better? We need our laws and our policies to secure protection and recovery of species. I just want to contrast to you an act that works, the Endangered Species Act in the United States. It's not perfect, of course, but it works, against the Australian IPBES Act. We have a chance to renovate the Australian IPBES Act, but we also have a chance for it to get a lot worse under the current IPBES Act review. If you haven't had a chance, get in and put your views to the IPBES Act review panel. Graham Samuel is taking late submissions because of the bushfires in COVID. It's totally worth just saying your piece because they're interested in what you've got to say. And I think the key things are mandating funding for species and mandating critical habitat protection. There's a lot of other innovations we can do, but we can do those basic things well to mirror what's done in the United States. We need to respond to global environmental change. We need to be flexible and agile. We can't just cling on to what's where and what's working. So here at Nadu Hills, this is a Bush Heritage site that's seen, I think, one of the best climate adaptation projects that I know of. And I love the way this has worked, been driven by science and the best available modelling of where species can persist. The dieback at Nadu Hills in the grey box and the yellow box was evident to the managers there. They've started to identify whereabouts in the country they should source seed from so that it's genetically predisposed to the climates that Nadu Hills are experiencing now and in the future. And that is essentially a great big provenance trial, which I think is just absolutely should be applauded. I think this is an amazing project. So congratulations again to Bush Heritage for this science-based climate adaptation. Again, some work of our NESP hub. This is in finding places where these western swamp turtles can breed, moving them from their drying landscapes around Perth down to the southwest. And when Nikki Mitchell at UWA has been leading that with DBCA in the Perth Zoo, and amazing results. These animals are doing better, they're breeding better, and this is what we can do if we can be flexible with where we put species and how we manage them under climate change. It's much easier to protect than recreate habitat, we know that. So let's stop losing habitats. This graph here by James Fitzsimmons shows where our protected areas are under what tenures in Australia. You can see that the bulk, even just at 2012, the bulk of our protected areas were Indigenous protected areas and public land. There's this sliver in here that still sits at around 7 or 8% of private conservation areas. This is a space we have to grow because we know that our most threatened species and ecosystems are existing on private land. We have to win in this private land space. And so this is a huge role for Bush Heritage again to lead this, the development of private land conservation areas for the most underrepresented and threatened ecosystems like this basalt plains grassland here, west of Victoria, less than 1% of its pre-European extent, still under immense pressure from urban development, and there's a huge opportunity ecosystems like this across the country for private land conservation. It's such an important part of the conservation profile in Australia. The other thing that we need to do is give people hope. My terrible, dirty, gloom and doom stories should only be told very briefly. The bulk of the conversation needs to be about what we can do and what works when we do it well. I think probably one of the most inspiring examples of this, of hope, is in the rediscovery of the night parrot and the very rapid motivation of bush heritage and other groups to try and identify and protect those places. And the Pullen Reserve is one of the great icons of threatened species conservation hope, I think, in this country. And we need more of this, good stories about what works when we do the right thing. And because of that, we actually supported the publication of a book called Recovering Australian Threatened Species, a Book of Hope. This is a compendium of good news stories led by Stephen Garnett up at CDU, and that actually tells a lot of stories about successful threatened species conservation efforts, and it identifies those key factors of an engaged community, committed people, and the right time and the right place. So there is hope. We have to continue to broker hope, and I think bush heritage is a beacon of hope for a lot of people in this country. The stories are hopeful stories, and it's a hopeful future. And that's it from me. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Brendan. I know there was a whole lot of material in there and a lot to absorb, and some of those graphs are a tad depressing, but I love the fact that we finish on hope, and I'm very much a believer in that if we all actually work together using our different skills, our different connections, that we can chart a different future for the planet. Now, I recognise that we've gone past the hour of 5 o'clock and that a number of you will need to leave us to do other things, and completely understand that. If you are able to stick around for a few more minutes, sort of 10, 15 minutes, then we're going to open up for, questions and conversations so that we can actually, get some of those burning questions out. So can I suggest, if you've got a question at all, please go into the system and either raise your hand or put it on the chat. I'm going to pick up a couple of questions from the chat first, and Brendan, you might know this one. A question is, what does the US and Oz spending equate to in terms of spending per species and species per citizen? I don't know if you've got any of that relativity stuff.
Yeah, sure. So the relative spending per species, that's the easy bit to answer. We spend about a 10th or a 20th, depending on whether you're talking about plants and animals, of what is spent on the listed threatened species in the United States. So they have 1,600 species on their list. We have 1,800 species on our list, and they spend between 10 or 20 times that amount on their species. So if you think about it as an average across species, we're spending about a 10th compared to the United States. Yes, the United States has a bigger economy, but I'm not really sure that we should think about it as scaling in terms of economy. We have a problem that's as big as theirs or bigger. And if we want to solve that problem, we've got to spend the money. And as I was trying to highlight, the actual amount of money that we need to spend is not a huge amount. $1.6 billion a year sounds like a lot of money, but in the context of our economy, and I think we can afford it. So that's my answer to that.
Great, thank you so much, Brendan. We've had a few comments on the chat with people that have had to sign off and people asking if they can share stuff that they've gleaned from this. Yes, please do. Please share it on social or with your networks and share the stories, because only is how we pull everybody together that we can actually make a difference. With asking questions now, because we have that opportunity for you to be able to unmute yourselves, etc., like bearing in mind that there's still 30 of us on the line. So if we all unmute at once, we're going to have chaos. So let's try and go with, if you can go into the participants area and just raise your hands first, and then I'll pass to you to ask some questions would be great. So we have a David here. David, I have no idea what your surname is. So if you recognise that you're the David, please unmute and fire away with your question. So thanks, David.
Yeah, that's probably me, and pardon the ocean noise in the background while I'm listening to you. That was really interesting. I'm interested in particularly the notion of the need for species to translocate, move away from environments due to climate change. You mentioned during the talk relocating turtles from one part of South Australia to another. What kind of challenge do you see for us to define what reserve boundaries look like, given that they're artificial lines on a map and animals can't survive within those artificial lines. What's the outlook for that?
Oh, look, it's a really good and very difficult question to answer. I think the outlook in terms of species is we do if there are species we really want to conserve, in many cases we are going to have to help them move, whether we're picking them up and moving them, whether we're getting seed from one part of the country and planting it in another, or moving turtles from Perth down to Margaret River. That's a challenging question. It's expensive. There are some problems. You can bring changes to an ecosystem that you're bringing a species into and cause problems. So it has to be done very carefully, with careful consideration of the ecosystem impacts. But I think in many cases it does have to be done. The other thing that we generally are trying to do is link up the landscape through restoration and protection to enable species to sort of move more naturally, I guess, perhaps in a way that they may have moved in the past in previous climatic change events like the last ice age and the like, where a much more connected landscape enabled them to move through the landscape and find those environments in which they could persist.
Thanks for that question, David. Please, some more hands in the air would be absolutely fantastic. We still have a few minutes and would welcome any questions, but for anybody that does have to sign off, please, if you've got some questions or you think of a question when you get off the call, just drop us an email and we'll get back to you with the response. So we've now got Peter Sainsbury. And Peter, and anybody who's asking a question, when you unmute, please, if you want to show us where you're managing to hang out at the moment. So if you want to put on your video as well, we'd obviously love to see you. So Peter, your question.
Yeah, thanks, Heather, and thanks, Brendan. That was a fantastic, well, it was a terrible presentation at one level. It was fantastic. It was so clear. There was so much that was shocking about it, but the 85% of wetlands that have been destroyed, I mean, that's just staggering. I mean, how many species must have been lost there? It's remarkable that we haven't suffered even more from destroying an essential part of the ecology so comprehensively. I just wanted to ask you if you wanted to say any more about that particular aspect of your talk. It was just staggering, that.
Yeah. Look, I think it is staggering, and in many cases, one of the tragedies is we probably don't even know what we've lost, in the sense that there probably were species utilising those wetlands that we never knew and will never know existed, and so that's a real tragedy of that kind of catastrophic loss. But if you think about the old stories of migrating bird species and the sky that you couldn't see through to the blue because it was thick with birds, I think it starts to paint a picture of what we've lost, not just in terms of species, but big processes, migrations and spectacles, and I think they're some of the most moving things to me are to read those old narratives from the 1700s, 1800s, where people talk about what they observed. And it seems like otherworldly because it sort of was a different world. A place where there was that kind of abundance that we just don't see anymore in quite the same way. So that's probably, I guess, my only comment. It is tragic. It has very much changed nature in the way, and migratory birds being such wetlands being so important for migratory birds, I guess, makes you reflect on what it might have been like to exist in a time when all those wetlands still existed and functioned as migration stopovers and overwintering sites. Yeah,
I mean, the Environmental Justice Australia sent round a brochure, an email and a brochure just a couple of weeks ago about greater gliders and just the destruction that's occurred there just in the last 20 years. I mean, you can sort of not excuse but understand that thylacines were made extinct. It was sort of ignorance as well as stupidity and rapaciousness. But to think that we're doing it now when we know exactly what we're doing,
Yeah.
It's just so astounding.
Yes, it is. So I'm always reticent to politicise these sorts of discussions, but to be honest, the treatment of David Lindenmayer, who's a real champion of greater gliders and greater glider habitat in the media and by some agencies at the moment, I think is really, really disappointing, and just reflects that we haven't gotten rid of that attitude of it really. The evidence is clear. We know what we're doing to greater gliders. The documentary evidence is there, but we're unable to change our practices, which is incredibly challenging.
Thanks for that. We've got, and thank you, Peter. I think we've got another question from David. I think you've got another one if you want to come off mute.
Yeah, I have. And sorry, this is a slightly different question. I should also say that I'm joining you through Macquarie University with the invitation to come here, and involved in National Parks Australia and other research organisations, been around for decades. But I'm kind of new to bush heritage. Why is it that bush heritage exists as an organisation and has the interest that it does? And through the talk, you also talked about having an interest in particular species as well as ecosystems and managing reserves and the like. Can you give me a bit of a background about bush heritage and why you exist and why the interest is there? Oh, and I should show you where I am.
Okay, you're going to make us all really jealous in a minute when you pull up a symbol of a beach sign.
It's not going to let me, so I won't hold you up.
Okay, well, look, and thank you. We can all imagine. So, you know, and a number of you will be quite aware of our history, but we were started by Bob Brown almost 30 years ago, when he won a major environmental prize, and there were a couple of blocks of land in Tasmania that were about to be logged in the Liffey Valley. And so he used the money from that environmental prize to save those blocks of land, or rather put a deposit on it, had no clue how he was going to raise the rest of the money, but galvanised some like-minded friends together, and that's how bush heritage started, with those 2 blocks in the Liffey, and you can still, post-COVID, go down and visit that. So it's really been about that history of people coming together to say these places are special. So for many years we have worked with partners and supporters to buy those pieces of land that are really precious and to be able to support and maintain them. So we have, as we said in the presentation, 117 staff around Australia, many of them living out on reserves, focusing on a day-to-day basis on what we classify as fire, ferals and weed. It's the things we talk about on a daily basis. And it's how we utilise fire and how we learn from traditional owners with fire as a tool, but also how we prevent the catastrophic fires, how we fight effectively, and it is a fight. We fight the weeds and the ferals to tip the balance in favour of the native species. So we look at things at a landscape scale. We're focusing on, you know, all animals. We don't predator-proof fence, so that means that we are dealing with, you know, foxes and cats and rabbits, and we recognise that we need to crack that challenge of dealing with those at scale. So we have a lot of work that's focused in those areas. But fundamentally, we exist because we love Australia. We love the amazing environment that we have, and we want to protect it. And that's what brings everybody to work each day. And that's what brings our 35,000 supporters and all of the brilliant volunteers that come out and help us do the work on the reserve. So if you want to know more, David, then drop us an email afterwards, and we can help you connect in with us and some of the great research project work that we do. And we do have a number of students and researchers around Australia that are involved. A number of those threatened species have been reserves that were purchased purely to focus on those or for those, such as Pullin for the night parrot. And others have been things that we've found along the journey. When we've purchased land and discovered a few extra species we didn't know were there. And sort of almost a day doesn't go by without an ecologist doing some work out on the reserves and discovering something else that we haven't seen before. The challenge is keeping them there and making sure that their numbers don't get so low that they disappear. That's a big challenge. I recognise that the time has well and truly evaporated, and that it's 5:20 and a number of people have had to leave. So I'll just one last call for any last question at all from anybody. That being the case, I think everybody's stomachs are probably trying to drag them towards dinner or a drink. So thank you so much, Brendan. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with it. It's always great, depressing, but great. It's that, you know, it's the added motivation to continue to keep doing the stuff that we're doing. And I want my kids to be able to see, you know, those, you know, flocks of birds and to see those animals and actually have that experience out in the wild. So thank you so much. Thank you to all the volunteers, the supporters, the staff that dialed in this afternoon. Hopefully you found it informative. It's been great having a chat and look forward to seeing you next time. So have a great evening. Stay safe during the joys of COVID, and hopefully we'll all be back out soon, out on the reserves,